Ian Stewart was 50 when he met his fiancée-to-be, Helen Bailey, in 2011. They met in an online bereavement group, and Helen was around 47 at the time, and she had no children. Her husband had died earlier that same year. He died by drowning when they spent time away on holiday together. So as you can imagine, she was quite fragile. Helen was a successful, much-loved children's writer and was rather successful when she met Ian. So Ian, with his own grief after losing his own wife the previous year, who died to an epileptic seizure, he wooed Helen. Helen was besotted with Ian, and she felt like she had met the man of her dreams. She actually visioned spending the rest of her life with him quite early on. Now, some people who were close to Helen thought that it was just the grief of losing her husband that had hazed her vision somehow, because she was willing to give this man so much so early on in the relationship. They set up home together with Helen's beloved dog Boris less than 2 years after meeting in 2013 into a town called Royston in Hertfordshire. Then in 2014, a year after moving in together, Helen writes a will. Now, she wanted to ensure that Ian would be secure in the event of her death. Now, this is a move that would prove to be a fateful one for Helen. It opened the eyes of a very dark, disturbing man. The same man that she was willing to put all of her trust into. The same man that would plan to kill her from this day on. 2 years following the signing of the will, Helen unsurprisingly started to feel weak and exhausted all the time, and she couldn't figure out what on earth could be causing her to feel like this. Now, even though she tried to get plenty of sleep and exercise, she was still continuously tired, and it was really affecting her day-to-day life. A month later, on the 15th of April, a 999 call was made by Ian Stewart, reporting his future wife as missing. He told the operator that she had left a note saying that she'd gone away to Broadstairs and she needed to clear her head, and asked not to be contacted. But he was getting increasingly worried because she didn't seem to be in the place where she said that she was going. Ian did show some concern, and he took part in some walks, and he also paid for missing persons flyers to be printed and posted everywhere that day. It seemed apparent to everyone that Helen took off to Broadstairs a few days earlier. She left a note to say where she was going and asked to be left alone to think. Her partner Ian checked on her location to find that she was not there, and that's when he called the police. On the 16th of April, a movement was made on Helen's phone, which had been switched off since she was last seen on the 11th of April. Now, it connected to the Wi-Fi in her Broadstairs cottage, and this gave police a glimmer of hope. Now, she also started to use her bank account following this, which also added to the hope of the police and also Helen's loved ones. Perhaps she really didn't want to be found. Perhaps she even changed her name and wanted to remain in an unknown location in Broadstairs, because that's where her electronic movements were tracked. Upon further investigation into her bank account, it appeared that her monthly standing order into her and Ian's joint account had increased substantially, which started to raise some eyebrows. Her bank started showing payments made for football season tickets, so it really was clear that it wasn't Helen that was using her account. It was starting to become apparent who was using it. Now, Ian Stewart had been away on holiday by the time the police went to urgently look for him at the home that he shared with Helen. They wanted to speak with him in June, but he was in Spain enjoying a relaxing holiday, the same relaxing holiday that he was originally meant to go on with his partner Helen. Even his own neighbours couldn't understand why he would leave the country knowing what's been going on at this current time with Helen being missing. The following month, on July the 11th, 2016, police raided the home that Ian and Helen shared and arrested Ian on suspicion of murder. Now, he refused to answer any questions as to Helen's whereabouts, but police had strongly suspected that he'd murdered her at this stage. It's just a lot more difficult to bring someone to justice for murder without a body. 4 days after Ian's arrest, on the 15th of July, police lifted the cover of a cesspit which was under their shed to find not only Helen's body immersed in the sewage, but her beloved dog Boris was laying beside her, deceased. Helen was determined to have been suffocated. It was undetermined as to whether the suffocation happened before being put in the cesspit or whether she had suffocated because she was put in the cesspit. Now, this is a question that is truly a disturbing one. Now, Ian had purposely parked his Jeep over the cesspit so that police did not pick up on it earlier. It was all so calculated. He had claimed he loved Helen, but it seemed he just wanted her dead from the moment she signed that will 2 years prior. After Ian was arrested, he was questioned, but he would refuse to provide any answers to the police. Regardless, he was given bail the very next day, but he was then rearrested 3 days later when Helen's body was discovered under the garage in the cesspit. So let's go back and look at when it all started. In February 2016, Ian started to give Helen Soapiclone. Now, this is a sleeping aid that was earlier prescribed to him after he had his own sleeping problems. Now, he continued to drug Helen with Soapiclone, and Helen had no idea what was going on. Now, she was growing increasingly concerned over her lack of energy and her constant urges to sleep. She had even made searches on her own laptop to try to get to the bottom of her current state, but little did she know that the source of her problems was the man that she fell in love with. On the 11th of April 2016, Helen was drugged for the very last time, and her body was dumped into the cesspit. It's unknown what the time of her death was, but her dog was later dumped down in the cesspit with her, apparently on that same day. Ian started the process of removing evidence and then began contacting Helen's solicitor for a push on the sale of one of Helen's homes, but the solicitor, they refused to discuss anything with Ian without Helen being present. So Ian later went to see his son play bowls that very same evening before buying them both a Chinese takeaway. He then sent Helen a text simply with 2 kisses that night. Days following the murder, Helen's friends and family were growing increasingly concerned over not hearing from Helen, so they prompted Ian to call the police, which he did. Now, he reported her as missing on the 15th of April, but the next day he drove to Helen's cottage in Broadstairs, where he used her phone, connected it to the Wi-Fi, and this was probably a move that was calculated to cover his tracks and to make police believe that Helen was really just hiding. So let's fast forward to the trial in January 2017, and Ian Stewart, in his own defence, testified that Helen and her dog Boris had been kidnapped in 2016 by 2 men named Nick and Joe, who wanted £50,000 in ransom money. He said he had to keep Helen safe so he couldn't tell the police what was happening. He said he knew both the kidnappers but could not prove who they were. Now, after a 7-week harrowing trial, Ian was found guilty on all counts of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum term of 34 years. Now, Diane Stewart, who was Ian's first wife, she died suddenly at their family home in Bassingbourn, Cambridgeshire in 2010. Now, her death was confirmed as epilepsy related at the time, but that was soon to change. An investigation was opened into Diane's death after Ian's conviction for Helen's murder in 2017. Now, although Diane was cremated, investigators, they were still able to piece together evidence to find that Diane may have had restrictions to her breathing from an outside source just before her death. Now, Diane had epilepsy and her brain was donated to medical researchers after her death. Now, this played a crucial part in the new investigation. And not only that, but Diane did not have any epileptic fits in almost a decade before her death. But Ian, he kept on trying to push the epilepsy-related theory from the moment he made that call to emergency services to report her death. Ian received almost £150,000 after his wife died, which then prompted him to buy himself a two-seater MG car. Now, all evidence was stacked against Ian and he was convicted of Diane Stewart's murder in 2022. Now, the two sons that he shared with Diane, they were clearly heartbroken at the discovery of the truth about the death of their mother. It's still very raw now because they have to relive all of that grief all over again a decade later. Ian Stewart will likely die in prison. He was a narcissist and he ultimately wanted to gain financially from every woman that he met. He was a financial predator and it didn't matter to him who he'd hurt along the way. So today, does 61-year-old Ian Stewart sit alone in his prison cell, reflecting on all the things that he did and the impact that his actions had on his sons' lives? Perhaps not.